This is a CBS News special report. The cardinals are gathered in Vatican City to choose a new pope. Inside the Sistine Chapel, an ancient tradition, cloaked in secrecy. Who will they elect? When will they make their choice? From CBS News, the Papal Conclave starts now.
Good morning from a bright and sunny Rome that is brimming with excitement. I'm Nora O'Donnell alongside Tony DeCopel, and you are looking live at the Pauline Chapel in the Apostolic Palace for the beginning of a centuries-old ritual, the Papal Conclave. This tradition steeped in history and mystery, and it will end with white smoke and the election of the 267th Pope, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church.
A chain that goes all the way back to Peter, and there they are on your screen now, the 133 cardinal electors. Do we have the picture? Those are the men who will choose the next pope. The details on them: all must be cardinals in good standing, under the age of 80. Their average age, by the way, just shy of 70. A lot of wisdom in the room, and 70 is also the number of different countries they call home. This is the most geographically diverse conclave in church history, including many countries sending cardinals here to vote for the very first time.
I mean, look how majestic this is, of course, with the guards there in front. Now, one of the men will almost certainly be the next pope, although did you know that the only requirement is actually to become a pontiff is to be a baptized Catholic man?
I did know that, but there have been rare exceptions over the years. It'll most likely be a cardinal.
That's right. That's right. And the Holy Father is charged with leading 1.4 billion Catholics around the world. There are about 60 million in the United States. And really, the church is at a crossroads. So this is a critical choice, a monumentally important sign of how the Catholic Church will move forward.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be a secret choice as well. The word conclave is Latin. It means with key. And it's an indication of just how serious they take this secrecy. The election is supposed to be airtight. There is a special master key. We're looking there actually at the chalice that the votes will be shaken in before they are counted. That's where they are placed. That's the receptacle. They will be locked inside by that key, a key that dates all the way back to 1870 once the voting gets underway. And the lock means, well, they hope it means anyway, that only a very, very, very select few know exactly what happens inside as the vote happens. And shortly, we will actually hear the order that sets all this in motion. Extra omnis. It's Latin for everybody out.
Yeah, everybody out. I mean, this place will be in lockdown, and that is when those big wooden doors to the Sistine Chapel, they are sealed shut. They are expected to hold their first vote tonight. And in the last 75 years, the longest conclave lasted 4 days. That was in 1958 when it took 11 votes to elect Pope John the 23rd. And the last conclave in 2013 that we were here for, well, it took only 2 days to select Pope Francis, and I remember it well. You
know, I met a couple of hopeful Catholics here who flew in from Missouri. They bought a cheap ticket. They got to get back Saturday for their best friend's wedding, so they are rooting for a very short conclave on the low end there. Now, remember, we will know that the Pope has been elected if we see smoke of a certain color from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. It's been outfitted with a special stack. You see it on your screen there. The fire department put it up not long ago. Black smoke, as you've probably heard by now, means no pope. They are still deliberating. White smoke means a great joy. A new pope is imminent. And after today, there will be 2 votes in this process each morning, and then 2 more votes each afternoon until a pope is elected.
You know, just as we look at these pictures, I'm thinking about how everyone has taken an oath of secrecy, everyone that's involved in this conclave. So if you're staffing this, if you're part of the Vatican Guard, you've also taken an oath to secrecy, or you can be excommunicated from the Catholic Church.
Yes, although no one has been so far. So we've got 3 guests here who seem to know an awful lot about what happened in past conclaves.
That's right. Let's just, as we quickly, before we introduce our guests, just want to take a listen to what's happening inside.
But then when we do see the election, and hopefully very soon we'll have a new pope, when the Next Pope
Dominus,
is
qui corda nostra dirigit in caritate et patientia Christi, sit cum omnibus vobis. Et cum spiritu tuo. Venerabiles fratres, cum sacris litaverimus, nunc conclave, ad diligentum Romanum Pontificem ingrediemur. Ecclesia universa nobis in oratione communica
and
Gratiam Spiritus Sancti
Cardinal Parolin is beginning the ceremony as the ranking Cardinal
Dominus
Bishop.
dirigat gressus nostros in via veritatis, ut intercedentibus beata semper Virgine Maria, beatis apostolis Petro et Paulo, et omnibus sanctis, que eis sunt placita semper agamus.
Berlin.
And that was the Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin, who is considered one of the front runners to be the next pope. I want to bring in our distinguished group of experts. Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo is a CBS News Papal and Vatican contributor, and we were together 12 years ago for the last pope. Adelia Gallagher as well, and of course, John Allen, the editor of the Catholic news site Crux. Welcome, everyone. And oh, Monsignor, you can hear, of course, they're broadcasting the Mass all the way out here in St. Peter's Chapel. It's just beautiful.
It's exciting. Can we imagine that from these 133 cardinals dressed in scarlet, a sign that they are willing to shed their blood as the Pope, one of them will emerge in white, and we will wait for those words, Habemus Papam. We have a Pope. It's a serious moment, but it's also a joy-filled moment. And what we are seeing now is the cardinals emerging from the Pauline Chapel, just adjacent to the Sistine Chapel, walking through the Sala Regia, where popes traditionally welcomed sovereigns, flanked by Swiss guards, and entering the great Sistine Chapel invoking all the saints from the east and the west. Once they enter the Sistine Chapel, looking at that great fresco of Michelangelo, The Last Judgment. Remember what Pope John Paul II said, before the Last Judgment, everything is laid bare. That is the great weight laid upon these cardinals as they elect a new pontiff. That is the great hope the Church and the world waits for.
Although, Monsignor, as we see this procession unfold, part of the work of this morning before they're in the chapel is to call in the Holy Spirit. The idea being that the Holy Spirit already knows who the next pope is, and it's their job in that room to figure out what the Holy Spirit wants them to vote for. And that's why they take that oath, and that's also why they reflect that one final time before the Last Judgment, that fresco on the wall. And yet, while the Holy Spirit decides, there's a lot of discussion in the days ahead. John, I see you smiling at that thought. Help us understand what's been leading up in the social life and the congregational life of the cardinals prior to now.
You know, the great Catholic saint of the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas, famously said that grace builds on nature, it doesn't cancel it out. What that means is the fact that Catholics believe there's a supernatural dimension to this process doesn't make it any less human, and therefore doesn't make it any less political. I mean, let us make no mistake. There is a great deal of political sausage being ground, and there has been ever since April 21st, when the news of Pope Francis's death broke over Rome and the world. Cardinals met every day in what are known as general congregation meetings, in which they profiled qualities they believe the next pope needs to have and issues that next pope is going to face. But perhaps more importantly than that, cardinals have also been meeting in 2s and 5s and 10s and 20s over dinner, over lunch, over private meetings in people's residences. And that is where conversations get awfully frank. And we're talking about, what do you think of so-and-so? Well, I heard so-and-so might have a problem in this area. What about this guy? And that's the sort of hard process of trying to arrive at a consensus, which is especially complicated when you consider that so many of these cardinals arrived in Rome as strangers to one another.
Well, as you point out, this is the largest and most diverse conclave in history, the most to gather in the Sistine Chapel. And Delia, what about that? Because as John was just describing, as they've been getting to know each other over the past week and a half, there are some favorites that have emerged, right?
Well, there are favorites that we have all discussed in the media. That doesn't necessarily mean that in the minds of the cardinals, those are the ones. But we have a general idea because we know what they spoke about during these general congregations, during these meetings, and the type of person they were looking for. And so the thinking is they might be trying to go back towards somebody who is going to unify. We heard that word also from Cardinal Ray today in the Mass this morning before this event started.
There were some specific words that Cardinal Ray used this morning that tell us maybe what they're looking for.
Exactly. Speaking about somebody who could help with peace in today's tormented world. He used very strong language, which some of us read as an indication that they are looking for somebody, or at least Cardinal Ray is indicating somebody.
Meaning like a statesman or a Secretary of State, Caroline?
Well, and gosh, who might that be?
And Cardinal Ray, keep in mind, is one of the old guard. He is 91 years old. And there's very few old guard in this group of cardinals. What's interesting about the fact that they have come from diverse places is that about 100 of them have never done this conclave before. So the ones that were nominated by Benedict and by John Paul II, which are 25 of them, have actually been through this process. So you can just imagine what they're feeling right now as they go in.
You know, one thing I want to let our viewers know as they hear the ancient sounds coming from the Pauline Chapel on the way to the Sistine Chapel is they're also going to be hearing the more modern and timeless sounds of wind, of birds. We're in the elements here. It might sound almost nautical if you're not watching closely. And down in the elements for us is our Maurice Dubois. He is in St. Peter's Square, taking in the atmosphere there. Co-anchor of the CBS Evening News. Maurice, I was down there yesterday. There are a lot of people very anxious to find out who the next pope is going to be.
That they are, Tony. I'm just trying to soak in this moment. This is a moment in humanity, in history, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are out here as well. It's kind of a contrast. You're looking at the Cardinals. Everyone here is watching the monitors as the Cardinals go into the Sistine Chapel. They've got their game faces on. This is a solemn, serious moment. You can feel the weight of it as you look at their faces. At the same time, for hundreds of thousands of people out here, I want you to introduce you to some of them as we move on through here this morning. It's a moment of joy. It's a moment to soak it in, to feel it. There are people here who are just tourists from anywhere in the world. There are people who are here specifically for the conclave, hoping to get a glimpse of history, of spirituality, of this next Holy Father. Let's just give you a quick little tour of what we can see here from our vantage point on the ground. If you look up, you can see the Apostolic Palace. That's on the right-hand side of Vatican Square, and that is where the Pope, whoever he may be, will come to the window and address the people on the Sunday audiences that they have every week. And that's where John Paul lived, in that building. If we pan a little to the left, you're going to see the top of the Sistine Chapel, the chimney that the whole world will be watching starting this evening. That's where the white smoke will come eventually when we do have a pope. That's the top of the Sistine Chapel, and that's where we see the cardinals going in right now. And then, if we look back here, this is St. Peter's Basilica, of course, and the balcony, the famous balcony, the loggia, covered by a top. And that's where the new pope will come out, and we'll get to see the new pope the first time wearing white and addressing the people. That's the moment everybody's going to be waiting for. And a little to the left and behind the columns is where Casa Santa Marta is, and that is where the cardinals have been staying, have been living in the dorm there, the hotel, if you will, and that is where Pope Francis famously made his residence. This is my third conclave. I was here when Cardinal Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI, and of course, when Jorge Mario Bergoglio became Pope Francis. It is a moment unlike any other on the calendar. It is a goosebump-inducing, spine-tingling kind of thing. Whatever faith you may be, it's something we're looking forward to, and we can hardly wait for it to get underway, guys.
right, Maurice Dubois, thank you. And as we watch these cardinals enter the Sistine Chapel, which has existed since the 15th century, they are, what you hear is the Litany of the Saints. And once these Litany of Saints and invocations are completed, we will hear from the celebrant. And I think it's a moment, Delia, to point out just a little bit of what we're seeing and their vestments.
Well, one thing that might be interesting to note is not all of them are dressed in red. So you will notice some of the cardinals who are called patriarchs are in black, actually, and that they are Eastern Catholic patriarchs, cardinals that follow, they are part of the Catholic Church, follow the Pope. I believe we have one from Ethiopia. We have Cyril Malabar, which is in India. So you will see some cardinals not dressed in the red attire. We also have two Dominican cardinals in this conclave, one from England, Timothy Ratcliffe, another from Algeria, Cardinal Vesco, French Algerian, and they are allowed to wear their white Dominican habits. So we'll see. We'll look out for that if underneath.
And Monsignor, is that also a reminder about Pope Francis's legacy, about reaching out to the peripheries and the number of cardinals that he appointed?
Absolutely. Pope Francis has appointed 108 of these cardinals. That's an enormous number. Many of them very young. That's really interesting too. There's one of the cardinals who I believe is 45 years old.
Wow.
A number of them are, under 60. I think 15 of them are under 60 years of age. And so that makes this conclave like no other. And just to remind ourselves that the last three pontiffs who appeared on that balcony behind us, Delia and Tony and Nora, I'm getting so excited here, were all surprises.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have to hold that in mind. It may not be the Secretary of State.
And that, Monsignor, is such an important point because we keep saying 108 of these cardinals appointed by Francis, and people then assume, well, they must be sympathetic to a continuation of his papacy. But that's not necessarily the case, is it? I see you nodding your head, Delia.
No, absolutely. I think that goes even more so when we talk about the Secretary of State, because if you imagine that, and a number of these men were working in Vatican offices under Pope Francis. So they were obviously doing what Pope Francis wanted, but it remains to be seen whether or not or how much they really subscribed to the Pope's way of doing things. And of course, that would be seen in another pontificate.
There is the classic Italian saying, Tony, that you always follow a fat pope with a thin one.
Okay.
Which means that you don't simply photocopy the previous pope. You elect somebody who is his own man.
The pendulum swings.
And I think we can expect that. On the other hand, it probably is, we're saying, sometimes front runners do win. I mean, in 2005, I think we all thought, heading into that conclave, that Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who had been the right-hand man, the intellectual architect of the papacy of John Paul II, was, if not the front runner, certainly one of them, and he did, in fact, win. In 1963, Paul Montini, who was elected as Paul VI, was considered the frontrunner of that conclave. So while surprises are possible, sometimes the surprise is the guy you thought actually does step out of that balcony.
Well, but then the surprises don't end there, because as I recall, when Francis was elected, emerged as Pope, there were some who thought he was going to be a more conservative Pope in his teaching and views, and he surprised people.
That's
so
absolutely
you don't know who's going to emerge, and then the person who emerges, you are never quite sure.
Sometimes the office changes the man.
How they're going to bear the burden.
You have to factor that in as well.
And part of the reason is, and Monsignor, if you could let people know here, we're looking at the tables that have been prearranged for the cardinals, if I have this right. And before them is a piece of paper where they will cast their ballot. On it, it says, "I elect as Supreme Pontiff." And then there's also a book of Gospels there. Do I have that correct?
Absolutely. So what's going to happen now is that the cardinals, after finishing the Litany of Saints, are going to sing the Veni Creator Spiritus, invoking the help of the Holy Spirit. There's a beautiful line in that. Let your light enlighten every one of our thoughts. That plays a big part for us as Roman Catholics, the Holy Spirit who descends and can change what has gone on up to this moment. All those meetings, the Holy Spirit can really change minds. So after that, one of the cardinals is going to call the other cardinals forward to place their hand on the book of the Gospels and to swear an oath. To swear an oath that they are going to keep to the rules of electing a new pontiff, that if elected a new pontiff, they will promise to guard the temporal and spiritual affairs of the church, and also everything that happens in this conclave will be kept a complete secret.
And they have given up their cell phones, right?
Yeah.
Can
you believe it?
And their tablets.
Yeah.
And after this moment, they will be in total lockdown. They had no television, no newspapers, no radio, no access to the outside world.
And not only that, they can't talk. They can only talk to one another. It's actually in the Apostolic Constitution here that if other members of Vatican City, people who must be inside, happen to come upon the cardinals, they are not to engage in the conversation of any kind.
There is one exception to that rule, which there are priests inside the conclave who are designated to hear the confessions of cardinals.
Wow.
So if a cardinal wants to go to confession during one of the down moments during the conclave, that's one conversation that is allowed to happen, which of course is already covered by the most absolute commitment to secrecy possible.
Well, and the people, the 100 or so people that are helping out, the cooks and all of the assistants that took that oath of secrecy themselves on Monday, are already very discreet people because they're already used to working in a Vatican where you don't say very much.
Yeah.
And if you do, you're not working there very long.
Exactly.
It's just incredible to think about that. And just to remind everyone, there are 133 cardinal electors that will cast their vote for the next pontiff. The ballot's right there on those desks. And take a look at the geographical makeup. This is extraordinary. 52 are from Europe, including 17 from Italy. That is the largest single bloc. 23 are from Asia, 16 from North America, with 10 U.S. cardinals, 17 from Africa and South America, plus 4 from Central America and Oceania each. Now, let's compare the share of the electors today against the last conclave 12 years ago, because this is where it gets interesting. Europe has seen a significant decline from 52% to 39%. And then on the flip side, take a look, like places like Asia, regions like Asia and Africa and South America have seen a great increase. Those are areas where Catholicism is rising rapidly. And of course, Pope Francis reflecting that by allowing there to be more cardinals from those areas as the church reaches out to the peripheries and tries to broaden its membership. Let's turn now to Seth Doan, who is following this along with us. Seth?
That's right, Nora. As you mentioned, it's just incredible looking at those numbers. Really, the legacy of Pope Francis is in those numbers. He wanted to increase geographic diversity. Around 70 countries, as you've mentioned, are represented in the College of Cardinals. And there has been this process of trying to get to know one another. As you know, they came, of course, for the funeral of Pope Francis and stayed for these general congregation meetings, a dozen of them. And we reporters have been running around after them, trying to get a little glimpse of what they might be discussing. I spoke with one cardinal from Algeria yesterday. I said, are names being mentioned? He said, no names, maybe not in those meetings. But of course, as has been explained to us, names are coming up in the periphery of those meetings as people get a chance to get to know each other and as people get a chance to pull a cardinal aside and ask questions. Lots done over glasses of wine, perhaps, and steaming bowls of pasta, as it has been described to me. But just one other reflection as I watch these cardinals here in the Sistine Chapel, it is such a solemn moment. And I'm reminded of the times that I've been into the Sistine Chapel as a tourist and also as a journalist, doing the Sistine story in the Sistine Chapel choir, going in there with this wonderful figure, this man they call the Clavigero, the guy who has all of the keys to the Vatican museums, and he got the key to the Sistine Chapel. We went in there very early in the morning, first ones into the Sistine Chapel. I know you all have been in there, and it is just an incredible, majestic place. And you can imagine that these cardinals, surrounded by that magnificent fresco by Michelangelo, Final Judgment there, really understand, are reminded of the weight of this decision. The Pope, of course, this is a singular office. Even in that office, Francis was a singular figure, and they are now charged with finding who can be the successor of him, the 267th Pope of the Catholic Church.
Seth Doan, words well said and well received. What's so remarkable in part about what we are witnessing is that it is essentially unchanged going back 2,000 years, and the rituals themselves, what we're seeing in the conclave, essentially unchanged for 800 years. And there are just so few things in our life that we touch that go back that far and that are still with us and shaping us today. And in fact, on that note, let's listen in to a little bit of this ancient ritual.
Veni Creator Spiritus. Oremus. Ecclesiae tue Domine, rector et custos, infunde
O Lord, ruler and
quesumus,
protector of your church, pour forth upon your servants, we beseech you, a spirit of discernment, of truth, and of peace, so that they may acknowledge with all their heart the things that are pleasing to you, and cleave to those things that have been perceived with all their strength. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
And following the prayer, we transition into the part where all the cardinal electors take part in the solemn swearing of the oath, as we mentioned at the beginning, which invites them to take this conclave in a form of solemnity and to maintain an aura of secrecy with what goes on. And this is the formula of the oath that Cardinal Parolin is now reading. Each and every one of us, cardinal electors, present at this election of the Supreme Pontiff, promise, bind ourselves, and swear to observe faithfully and scrupulously all the prescriptions contained in the Apostolic Constitution of the Supreme Pontiff, John Paul II, Universi Dominici Gregis, issued on February 22nd, 1996, and also the modifications of the motu proprio Normas Nonnullas of the Supreme Pontiff, Benedict XVI, on February 22nd, 2013.
Litteras apostolicas normas non nullas a Summo Pontifice Benedicto XVI, die altero et 20 mensi februari, anno bismillesimo 13 motu proprio datas.
Likewise, we promise, bind ourselves, and swear that whoever of us by divine disposition is elected Roman Pontiff will commit himself to faithfully carry out the munus petrinum, the Petrine ministry, of pastor of the universal church, and will not fail to affirm and to defend boldly the spiritual and temporal rights, as well as the freedom of the Holy See. Atque tueri, nunquam esse destiturum.
Precipue autem promittimus et juramus nos religiosissime.
Above all, we promise and swear to observe with the utmost fidelity, with all, both clergy and laity, the secret concerning everything related in any way to the election of the Roman Pontiff, and about what happens in the place of the election concerning directly or indirectly the scrutiny, not to violate in any way this secret both during and after the election of the new Pontiff, unless explicit authorization is given by the Pontiff himself. And
nulli consensioni, dissensioni, alique quilibet intercessioni, quibus autoritates seculares quis
And Monsignor, they are now taking this oath, right?
They are in this historic Sistine Chapel. The first conclave was held in this chapel in 1492, and every conclave has been held here since 1878. It's just an amazing place. If we look now at that great fresco of Michelangelo, but also flanked by windows at the top of the first 30 popes, looking down now upon these cardinals in this unbroken line of succession for 2,000 years. And around the Sistine Chapel on the right side, frescoes of the life of Jesus. Right at the center, the most important fresco of Peter being given the keys by Jesus. Each cardinal now coming forward, placing his hand on the gospel, promising to keep the rules of this conclave, and if elected pope, to protect the temporal and spiritual goods of the church and the freedom of the church as well. We will see each cardinal one by one going forward now.
And they're coming up in order of precedence. So there are three different gradations, as it were, of cardinals. So the first is the cardinal bishop. Then you have, which is only a handful of them. That's the highest one. And then the cardinal priests, which are about 100 or so. And then the cardinal deacons, which are the most junior type of cardinal.
And it might be worth saying that there is one other element to that oath that is especially important, which is the cardinal's
We should pause here. We have Cardinal Tagle.
Tagle from the Philippines, widely considered among the Papabili, or men who could be pope. Well, it's one other element to the oath all of these cardinals are taking is they promise to reject secular influence in the conclave, which in centuries past.
That looks like Cardinal Prevost.
Cardinal Prevost,
American
the
from
great
Chicago.
American hope to be pope.
Well, let's take that question up right now for the moment as we see an American cardinal on screen. Why is it so unlikely, we are told, that there will be an American pope?
Well, because first of all, this began as a logistical problem. In the days when you had to travel to Rome by steamship, it was very difficult for Americans to get here on time and certainly to be part of any of the pre-conclave politics. Then later it became a geopolitical issue. That is, it was considered impossible that you could have a superpower pope. But that's no longer true.
But in Cardinal Prevost, born in Chicago, went to Villanova, spent many years in Peru, his star has been rising, correct?
It has, because he's seen as a great missionary to begin with. Because he did spend most of his career outside the United States. You know what the Italians say? He is il meno americano tra gli americani. He's the least American among the Americans, which in their book is a very positive thing.
The other important thing about Prevost is he's had a lot of experience over here as well in the Curia at the Vatican, and that's something that they also look for.
We just see there Cardinal Peter Turkson, who's the great African hope. It's interesting, in this conclave, there are four Peters. There's Peter Turkson, there's Peter Erdo from Hungary, also a Papabile, there's Piero Battista Pizzaballa from Jerusalem, and of course Pietro Parolin. So one of these Peters could come out on that balcony.
All doing the work of selecting the successor to Peter. It's pointed out to us that they don't want the pressure of a successor to Francis, not a follow to the last pope. Rather, it's a follow to the first pope, a continuation of that history.
We've been hearing that a lot as a kind of moniker for, I think, to take the pressure a bit off of the cardinals to try and find somebody.
Although it's
exactly
difficult
like
to
Francis.
argue that there is less pressure to be the successor of Peter.
Exactly.
Right? Because the great apostle of Jesus and the very first.
And there we see Peter Erdo, who is the Archbishop
of Hungary.
And he is considered more of a favorite of the conservatives, correct?
Absolutely. He is a canon lawyer, a great favorite of the conservative side. Talk here in Rome that some 20 cardinals are behind Cardinal Peter Erdo.
Maurice Dubois is with us still. He's down in the square. Maurice, when I was there yesterday, I spoke to people who were staying in the vicinity so that they can rush back the moment they hear a pope may have been chosen. What are you seeing? What are you hearing from your vantage point?
Well, you know what? That's exactly what happens when a pope is chosen, right? The white smoke, the bells start ringing, and then the place floods with people. Right now, it's flooded with people on the outside, mostly, of the gates. One of them I'm joined by right now is Father Patrick Briscoe. You are a Dominican friar. You're from the New York area. You're a journalist. Before we get to the whole moment here, let's just describe what you do as a Dominican friar. What's your point of view? What's your vantage point?
My task in the life of the church is really preaching. That's our charism, what we call our special mission.
Anytime, anywhere?
Anytime, anywhere. On the streets, but on the web. This is the new Areopagus we talk about, the new marketplace, the new public square of the exchange of ideas. So I host a podcast with a couple friars, and then I'm the editor of our Sunday Visitor, a National Catholic magazine.
And people can see your work there and widely. So let's talk about the church itself in America. There are some 53 million Catholics, right? The mission is to obviously grow that or not erode. What are your thoughts on who the next pope should be for that to happen? Or the type of person that should be for that to happen?
incredible question, because when you start thinking about the influence that the Church in the United States has, is it's very disproportionate to our actual population. The Catholics in the United States make up about 7% of Catholics in the world, which is not so much. But we know that it's Catholics in the U.S. that contribute substantially to the finances of the Vatican, to the Holy See, and to the world's important humanitarian projects. And that represents a kind of outside voice. And there are many concerns that come along with that. Of course, one is the concern for increased transparency when it comes to Vatican finances, for accountability to resolve the ongoing clerical sexual abuse crisis. But underneath it, even more important than those things, I think, for Catholics in the United States, is a call for a pope who would be very evangelical, that would have a kind of spirit, a charisma to go out to the world, to continue to build up the life of the Church, to engage those Catholics that have fallen away, that are disengaged, and to really reach out to people and bring them in.
So are we talking another Francis, or go in a different direction, shall we say?
I think it will be impossible to get away from the Pope's kind of style. I mean, whoever succeeds him will have to have that kind of sense of energy, but it'll probably be mixed with, as the cardinals have been talking about, greater clarity and a little bit more theological precision.
One more thought. What are you feeling here with this show of humanity? There are thousands upon thousands of people in this vicinity right now. What's it like? How do you describe it?
I'm just grinning from ear to ear, because it's so beautiful to see how diverse the Church actually is. The whole world is on display here. I saw a little flag from Slovenia as I was walking in, and I thought, well, there's not a Slovenian contender, but there are people here very excited to represent themselves, and you see it all throughout the square.
Right, you bet. Father, thank you. Really appreciate your insight. And guys, as we send it back to you, literally people from everywhere here, people on a pilgrimage, people who just happen to be on vacation, people trying to soak in this moment, and we're here to share it with them.
Maurice Dubois, thank you. And as we are seeing each of these cardinal electors individually take the oath in Latin, promising, vowing, and swearing, saying, "So help me God," in this particular moment. And as you can see, some people may recognize Cardinal Dolan there of New York. Let's listen for a moment as he makes his and takes his oath.
Cardinalis Dolan, spondio, lovio, ac juro, sic me Deus adjuvit et haec sancta Dei Evangelia quae manu mea tango.
Tim Dolan, it sounds like Tim Dolan.
even in, yes. Well, go ahead, Delia. Yes.
I mentioned that Cardinal Harvey, another American, is just coming up after this cardinal who has had long service over here in the Pope's household. He's a reserved American. Not a lot of Americans probably know him because I think most of his life has been spent over here. And he's now at the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. This is Cardinal Harvey.
For 27 years, we said that Cardinal Harvey was the second most photographed man in the world because he served as the head of John Paul's papal household. So whenever John Paul appeared in public, Harvey was just to his right. So there are countless millions of photographs in which he appears.
As we watch this, though, I can't help but wondering what's going through the minds of each of these men. We always say in America that every senator looks in the mirror and sees a president. They are human, after all. Do they not look in the mirror this morning and see a future pope?
Yes, in fact, here we have Cardinal Muller, who is very critical of Pope Francis, really asking for a non-heretical pope. He was so outspoken in these congregations. Coming up right behind him is the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Vincent Nichols. It just shows to us how varied this conclave is. 55 nations have a single elector.
And many of those nations are sending an elector for the very first time. And the gaps in there's shared belief and yet different interpretations of some of the teachings. And so you have a result where Francis may and his papacy recommend path A, and then the African archbishop wants a special dispensation for something a little bit different. And that's part of what the challenge is for this next pope, to balance these different competing perspectives and ideologies around the world.
We saw precisely the scenario you mentioned actually play out during the latter stages of Francis's papacy, when he issued a controversial document authorizing the blessing of persons in same-sex unions. And the African bishops en masse rose up and said, we can't do that in our pastoral situation. And in the end, Francis gave them permission not to apply that document in their backyard. So you're right, Tony. The trying to put together all of the different experiences and outlooks and priorities of a global church that is present in every nook and cranny of the planet, this is not easy.
But as some of the great reporting that has been done today about those very African cardinals, though, they did ask for some leniency when it came to polygamy.
Because that has been part of their cultural experience, let's be clear. Although many African bishops are very allergic to the idea of changing the rules on marriage today. For instance, giving communion to divorced and civilly remarried Catholics.
Which Pope Francis
also did in 2016. Because they will argue, excuse me, Father, because they will say, we have spent generations trying to tell our people marriage is one man, one woman for life, to sort of convince them to abandon polygamy. Now, if we move the goalposts, what does that mean?
Yeah, what were you going to say, Monsignor? Yes.
Which is why this moment is so key and important. We're electing a pope whose first task is unity in the church, and Cardinal Ray alluded to that in his homily this morning. I was there, and it was striking. He said unity does not mean uniformity, but we do have a successor of Peter who is called to bring that unity. He is head of the College of Bishops. It is that man whom we are electing.
And given that, Monsignor, how do you think this group of cardinal electors, who do you think that they may ultimately choose? I know you may be reluctant to say a name publicly. You've told me privately, but...
And I was reading your emails over your shoulder, so I know too.
But maybe talk about that, because people say, will there be a Pope Francis II?
My great thought, and as you know, Nora, we don't wage bets as Catholics, do we? But I'm already wagering my bet on the Holy Spirit has already chosen the right man who will steady the ship.
Yeah.
I think that's what the cardinals are looking for.
Why does it need steadying? What do you mean? In what way?
Pope Francis was a wonderful pope in terms of mercy, compassion, going out to the peripheries. I experienced that personally. But in many ways, he was a revolutionary pope. He himself said, I like to make a mess. And that has shaken a church that is traditionally used to great order, great doctrine that never changes. Pope Francis really has shaken up the church.
You know, but I know we're going to talk about the contenders for a moment here, but I think as we talk about the need to steady the ship, we should also reset it in a way to say this is a tremendous moment of opportunity for the Catholic Church. After years of people walking away from the faith in America and Europe in particular, you have a moment in time with tremendous technological change where people are feeling isolated, alone. The modern world, the secular world is not giving them everything they want, and they are turning to some place. And this could be that place.
Tony, I think you're absolutely... We've had great popes in this century. We had St. John Paul II, who opened people's hearts. We had Pope Benedict, who filled people's hearts with great doctrine. We've had Pope Francis, who's told us, what do you do now that Pope John Paul opened your hearts, Pope Benedict filled your hearts? Go out to the peripheries. Go out to the world. We want a pope now who takes all three. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have one pope, 3 in 1 now, okay, in the new pontiff?
And as the cardinals continue to take their oath, I think it's a good opportunity to talk about who some of the front runners are, and so we can show everybody who has risen to the top of the list based on our reporting and conversations. And John, let me ask you to, first of all, I think at the top of the list really is the Secretary of State, the man that's second in command here at the Vatican, Pietro Parolin. What do we know about him and his philosophy?
Well, Cardinal Parolin was born in northern Italy. He has spent virtually his entire adult life as part of the Vatican's diplomatic corps. served in papal embassies in various parts of the world, and then came back to Rome. He was, for a period of time, the head of the China desk inside the Vatican Secretary of State, and then rose up through the ranks, and eventually, as you say, was named to the top job, the Secretary of State, for 12 long years under Pope Francis. I think he would be seen as somebody, Monsignor Tony was talking about the desire for somebody who's perhaps a little more conventional. That certainly would fit Cardinal Paroline's profile. He would be seen as a safe pair of hands. I think the one knock on Cardinal Parolin is that if you were going to hold a charisma contest among these cardinal electors, I don't think he would be in your top 10.
Considered a mild-mannered centrist. And Delia, let's talk about the other two men on that list, including Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines, 67 years old, a man who is known as having a lot of charisma, in fact, sings and dances.
Absolutely. He is the pastoral par excellence. He will fill the Francis shoes in terms of being out with the people and showing that charisma. He has had also experience here at the Vatican with the Council for Evangelization, so he has some knowledge of the Vatican, perhaps not seen as such a sort of strong director of the Vatican, which you need, especially nowadays with the finances and lots of other administrative things to do. He was also in charge of Caritas, which is the Catholic charity arm, and stepped down from that. There was some turbulence in that, not necessarily due to him, but he did step down from that.
Was he asked to step down from that role?
Yes, he was asked to step down from that role, but again, it's unclear exactly what his role in that was. There were a number of heads that were asked to step down there.
The Philippines is roughly 80% Catholic. Cardinal Tagle would be considered the first Asian pope.
Well, it would be amazing. It would be quite the opposite of electing Parolin, for example. So you would be going from a South American pope to a Filipino pope. It would be really just keeping the ball rolling, in my opinion.
We were talking earlier, in some ways, it would be like going back to the John Paul years, in that if you remember how many Poles came through Rome during the John Paul years, because he was the uncrowned king of Poland, imagine how many Filipinos would be streaming through this.
Oh, it would be unbelievable.
It would be off the hook.
It would be
wonderful for that.
Yes. And then, of course, let's not leave out Cardinal Pizzaballa. I mean, nobody's going to forget that name ever.
That's right.
Obviously an Italian.
Yeah.
But one of these incredible posts, he is the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, and he has been heavily involved in what has been happening in Gaza post October 7th.
Cardinal Pizzaballa really is the dark horse. There's an interesting story when Pope Pius X was elected. His name, Sarto in Italian, means a seamstress, a sewer. And the story is that a cardinal, when he was elected, opened the curtains behind us here by the balcony and made the sign with his fingers of a seamstress. I'm just wondering what happens with Pizzaballa, which means throwing the pizza into the air. Yeah. What sign they're going to make. But in fact, I met all three of these cardinals this morning, Cardinal Parolin, Cardinal Tagle, and Cardinal Pizzaballa. And everything you have said is absolutely true. Cardinal Parolin, when he came out, he said, Anthony, I've got to come to Assisi, which is where I live, which is amazing that he remembered it. Mm-hmm. He's a diplomatic man. Cardinal Tagle burst out into tears.
Wow.
He is the crying man, isn't he?
Yeah,
He's very, very...
Where's his card in the sleeve?
Yeah.
And Cardinal Pizzaballa, interestingly, he nodded, but he's discreet, reserved.
Very interesting.
Interesting.
For that last name in particular, the personality may not match the fun of pizza dance, which is the literal translation.
Yeah. And I was struck that after October 7th, that Cardinal Pizzaballa said he would be willing to offer himself in exchange for the Israeli children taken hostage.
Look,
that ultimately come to be, but
he has managed that very difficult situation quite well by all accounts, and that is certainly something in his favor. The thing that is not in his favor is he's 60 years old, so he's considered young.
So let's talk about that window that people talk about sometimes for not too old to be pope, but at the very same time not too young. What is the window that?
Well, if you consider the last two popes were elected at the ages of 78 and 76, respectively. I think generally we figure late 60s to mid 70s, call it. That would sort of be the sweet spot. But if you find the right man, some would be willing to push that envelope on either side.
You have to consider John Paul II was 58.
Yeah.
And then had a 26-year pontificate.
At the same time, popes are living longer. And we're in a very mediatic age where everything is seen on television and on social media. So as a pope begins to age, it can be difficult.
The energy level has to be significant. The trips are many, many thousands of kilometers. You have a lot of stamps in the passport.
Well, you know, Tony, this comes back to a question you asked earlier. You know, every senator looks in the mirror and sees a president. Does every cardinal look in the mirror and see a pope? Honestly, I think the answer to that question is no. Because the burden of this office is bone-crushing. I mean, think about what we expect a pope to be, popular expectations. We want a pope to be a living saint. We want him to be a skilled diplomat. We want him to be a Fortune 500 CEO. We want him to be a gifted communicator. Any one of these things is hard to do well. Putting them all together is a prescription for frustration. And you compare that to the life of a retired cardinal, where you still get all the best seats at the restaurants, but you don't have to get up in the morning and go to work. And think about, you carry that burden until you die. Yeah. I honestly think most of these cardinals, just at a purely human level, pray, let this cup pass.
Yeah, there's a story from the 70s. Father Reese told me this, Thomas Reese, that one cardinal, seeing the vote moving in his direction, muttered for loud enough for all to hear, I don't want it, and I won't take it.
Well, Pope Benedict famously said when he heard his name, he felt like he was being led to the guillotine.
Oof. Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
Let's listen in, because these last cardinal electors are taking their oath, and then we will hear the extra omnes, which is then asking everyone all leave, essentially.
Not asking.
That's right. Telling them, and they will lock it up. So let's listen.
Manu mea tango. Et ego Matteus Maria Cardinalis Zuppi, spondeo voveo ac iuro. Sic me Deus adiuvet et ec sancta Dei Evangelia, que manu mea tango.
Et ego Cristóbal Cardinalis López Romero, spondeo voveo ac iuro. Sic me Deus adiuvet et ec sancta Dei Evangelia, que manu mea tango.
Et ego Antonius Cardinalis Cambanda, spondeo voveo ac iuro, sic me Deus adiuvet, Hex sancta Dei Evangelia.
Then it looks like David.
Well, there are cardinals that are still coming up to take their oath, and I believe we are seeing one of the other cardinals, David of the Philippines, who's
this is Wilton Gregory.
Oh yes, of course, yes, from Washington D.C. Yes, Wilton Gregory, well regarded in the United States. And it's a good time to ask, you know, how many of these popes, how many of these popes, how many of these cardinals, yeah, they're all popefuls in some regard. How well do they know each other?
Well, as opposed to years past, not particularly well at all.
But there's synods and there are occasions where they meet.
But Francis had fewer than other popes, right? So
Francis did not call together the cardinals on a regular basis, which is sotto voce. One of the things you have heard some of these cardinals saying is that no matter what happens in the future, we need to be able to come together more often to avoid precisely this scenario that we're coming together as a group of strangers.
As we see here is Cardinal Aveline, who is from Marseille.
Yes.
And it is said that this choice is Pope Francis. He is Pope Francis's choice, a man very much in the mold of the good Pope, Pope John the 23rd.
In part because there are many migrants that come through Marseille, yes.
But also because he just looks like John the 23rd, a frumpy little roly-poly guy, but with a smile that just lights up a room.
Mm-hmm.
We are about 75 cardinals in. We've got people taking a close count here, which means we still have a ways to go here in the individual oaths before that all-important a moment of maximum drama, extra omnis, all out.
We can take a moment, if we want to look at the other popefuls, some of the other names that have been mentioned, I think, is people are very curious about who this conclave may elect as the 267th pope, and whether, ideological difference. And I don't know if you want to mention any of the additional people that have risen to the top, Delia.
Well, our Borelius I see there from Sweden, who's interesting because he is a convert from Lutheranism. I mean, he is in a country and from a country which does not have a lot of Catholic members, and the Pope took a trip there. They were good friends, and seems like he would be a very congenial pick, very much liked amongst the European cardinals that know him. Mm-hmm.
Also on that list was Cardinal Peter Erdő of Budapest in Hungary, and Nora, you mentioned ideologies. He would certainly be I think, the leading conservative candidate in this sweepstakes, seen as he has a background as a trained church lawyer, is a very fine canonist, seen as a man of great culture, is also perceived to have a very good relationship with Viktor Orban and the Fidesz party in Hungary, and a more conventional, traditional figure on most contested church issues. So he would not be a repudiation of Francis's legacy, but he would be what we say in American politics, something of a course correction.
And what about Cardinal Zuppi?
Yes, Cardinal Zuppi is the president of the Italian Bishops' Conference. He's a very pastoral man. He used to be a parish priest here at Santa Maria di Trastevere, right in the heart of Rome, amongst the poor, and from a community called Sant'Egidio, very much involved in social works. He certainly is a favorite amongst the socially minded cardinals. As we see the tall cardinal coming up, he is Cardinal Piero Battista Pizzaballa, coming forward in just three. Another one of those who is certainly Papal.
I guess it's probably a good thing that if he becomes Pope, he will pick a new name.
Yes, Pizzaballa, not the person there, but 2, 3, 4, the tall with the goatee there.
So just to catch some of our viewers up on, say 500 years of papal history, we had about 450 years of Italians, then we had a Pole, then we had a German, most recently an Argentine. As we can see from this list of contenders, we could go back to an Italian, or there's a very good chance there's a whole new direction for the church.
Well, if you think about it, the election of John Paul II in remember, that was the second conclave of 1978, because there had been an Italian elected, Pope John Paul I, Albino Luciani, but he died after 33 days, and so they had to come together. That election ended the Italian monopoly on the papacy. From that point forward, the Pope could be a non-Italian. In 2013, the election of Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Argentina, the Pope from the ends of the earth, as he put it, ended the European monopoly on the papacy. It opened a new world where the new Pope really can come from anywhere. Honestly, I don't think nationality is a voting issue here. I think if they find the man they want, the passport that man holds won't matter.
They all speak multiple languages, although I've noticed as a journalist, when you run up to try to track somebody down here in the square, suddenly they don't speak English that well. They don't want to talk
or
to you.
Italian,
or Italian. Anything you can come up with.
Yeah.
It's quite a moment here. I think we have Maurice still with us, right? Maurice is down in the square, co-anchor of the CBS Evening News, and today I think you found some Americans. Maurice, what do you have?
I have a couple of Americans, great English speakers, by the way, Tony. Thank you very much. I'm here with Gabrielle and Jessica. Thank you for coming to talk with us. You guys just met. It turns out you were on vacation here in Europe, and you had to be here. You're from San Antonio, and you're from New York City. First of all, where do you get a job that you can just like ditch work and come here and spend this kind of time? What do you do for a living?
So I'm a firefighter, so I work for the San Antonio Fire Department.
Okay, so get someone to cover for you.
Yes, work a few shifts.
How about you, Jess?
I am self-employed. I do valuation work and financial advisory for hospitals and health systems.
Okay, so super important for you to be here. Why?
For me, I was born and raised Catholic, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be able to come for the conclave. So I was in Amsterdam, supposed to fly back on Friday, but I extended for another week, and I'm really excited to be here.
Let's hope it doesn't go more than a week, right?
Let's hope not.
Right? What about you? You ditched your plans too.
Sure. Well, I extended them. I was in Belgium visiting a friend for Easter and extended this day and added Rome. I leave tomorrow, so I probably won't see the white smoke, but just any part of it was exciting. And I'm sending lots of video to my nieces and nephews.
So what are you hoping for and dreaming for and really wanting in the next Pope?
For me, I just feel like it's going to be awesome to see like the new leadership come in, and I think just unity for the church. I think the Holy Spirit's really going to guide the cardinals on who to pick, and I'm excited to see like where they're going to bring the church.
Well, let's put it this way: a Francis or a whole different direction? What's your thought on that?
I feel like I don't really have too many thoughts. I think it's going to go how it's supposed to go. But yeah.
Diplomats.
I like that answer.
What about you? There are a lot who want Francis in the United States. Our polling shows 7 out of 10 people in the United States want another Francis-type Pope. What do you think?
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I love the 3 last popes we've had for different reasons. They all brought something different to the table. Different personalities, different passions, and how they present themselves. I mean, Pope Francis, everyone loved him because he was such a man of the people and just simple and open, and people were able to connect with him. But for those of us that are JP2 generation, as we call ourselves, there's a lot of charisma there, and I think Pope Benedict also, they all were amazing in different ways. So I'm just excited for whatever the Holy Spirit brings us.
Whatever divine inspiration we can get. One more thing here. You all were able to get inside the square, right? That's not an easy thing to pull off. What's the secret? How do you get that ticket? How does that work?
So there's no tickets for this, but you got to get here early. Today it's not too much. I mean, it's the first boat. Tomorrow there will be 4 boats. Smoke will come in the afternoon and in the evening. So you want to be here early. So it might happen tomorrow, might happen Friday. We'll see.
What do you imagine you're going to feel when that smoke does come?
I don't know. I think it's going to be something I remember for the rest of my life. Something I'm going to be able to tell like my kids, my grandkids in the future. I'm excited.
I've seen it a couple times. It's unlike anything else. It really is.
Yeah.
Jessica, Gabrielle, thank you so much. Really appreciate your thoughts. You are 2 of thousands of people here filling the area around St. Peter's Square and starting to fill St. Peter's Square up as well.
Maurice, I love that conversation with those Americans. I spoke to many American Catholics who had made their way here yesterday. I told you earlier about the young men from Missouri who booked the cheapest possible flight to Venice and then rented the cheapest possible car, a Fiat, drove 6 hours here, and are hoping for a quick conclave so they can get back to their friend's wedding on Saturday.
And I can understand why, because there's nothing like it to be part of a global event. I mean, Rome in of itself is just fantastic.
Although, Nora, there was another couple I met that were here. They were on a pilgrimage. They're going to see the Colosseum tomorrow. And I said, well, you're going to cancel those plans if it looks like there's going to be a new pope. The woman said, yes, we are. And the man said, no, we're going to see the Colosseum. We came all this way.
I have a feeling that she's going to win out on that argument.
Although there is that fascinating moment, and it's exciting. You know, when we have the Pope, Habemus Papam, all the bells will ring out and the Italians and the Romans will flood to this square. You remember it?
I do.
That's the excitement we're waiting for in these days.
Yeah.
No one does it like the Catholic Church in this moment. I believe it.
It is remarkable. And, one observation as we are all watching this, because this is the largest and most diverse conclave in history, things are going to take a little longer, right, Monsignor?
We have 133 cardinals, and that's just going to add a lot of extra time. So we're going to be called to be extra patient. We have to remember as well, when Pope Francis was elected, on the last vote, one cardinal attached 2 papers to the one ballot. So they had to cancel that vote and they had to go through it all again.
Sure, if they make a mistake, then it starts all over again. And if you see here, when they go up with their ballot, they're walking and processing up just as they're doing now to put their hand on the gospel. So the amount of time that it's taking them to do this oath is something similar to the amount of time it's going to take them to put those ballots in.
And Monsignor, for people who have seen that new Hollywood movie, Conclave, Oscar-nominated movie, did they get that scene somewhat right in the way the ballot is rectangular? They write the name, they fold it over, they walk up, they put it in the chalice, and then, of course, the name is read, and then, of course, there is that red thread. That all is accurate, correct?
Absolutely. I watched Conclave a couple of nights ago, and I must say that a large part of it is quite true. This is exactly what's going to happen. And they're going to kneel down before the fresco of Michelangelo and say those famous words that I swear, in my own mind, this is the man whom I consider to be the next pope. It's an ominous task.
You know, and Americans will be familiar from the last election of an American politician for president, the conversation around election security. Well, they take it very seriously here at the Vatican, not only with the oath of secrecy, of course, but with the two sets of scrutineers selected in advance. There's 3 gentlemen who review the votes, and then 3 more who double check that review the votes.
The revisers,
The revisers. There's the scrutineers, the revisers, and then every cardinal also is allowed to keep a running tally at his desk as these names are being called out. So there is not going to be any doubt whatsoever as to what the vote total was at the end of this process.
They literally read it out 3 times. So first person reads it out, second person reads it out, third person reads it out and puts it onto the needle and the thread and writes it down.
One thing to understand is that all of that takes time. You know, we imagine in the conclave that there's all this charged political debate going on. No, inside the Sistine Chapel itself, virtually the entire time that the cardinals are inside is given over to the ritual of the balloting. Each ballot takes about an hour and a half, and with this extraordinary number of electors, it'll probably even take a little longer.
So they sit the whole time? They don't stand up and
most of them will tell you that while that's going on, they're sitting reading their breviary. That's a book of prayers that clergy have, or praying a rosary, or doing. The one thing we know they're not doing is checking Instagram, because their devices have all been confiscated.
I believe the kids call it raw dogging it if you're going to go through a long period of time with no electronic device.
Oh, right. Well, they're of a certain age, so they might be used to
I just wanted to, the cardinal we just saw come up with the black covering over his head is the cardinal from Melbourne, just 45 years old.
The youngest.
Incredible. The youngest. Imagine if he were elected pope.
You know, we have been talking about this centuries-long tradition of the conclave to choose the pope, and our Seth Doan recently visited the site of the first conclave. And Seth, what was that like?
Nora, it was interesting. I drove up to the town of Viterbo, about an hour and 15 minutes from Rome earlier in the week, to see where that first conclave was back in the 1200s. That's where we get that word conclave, from the Latin there, with the key, because they had to lock the cardinals into the palace of the popes there to make a decision. That conclave, you were just talking about how long, that was a bit longer with these 133 cardinal electors. Well, these cardinals took 1,006 days, nearly 3 years to pick a pope. And the townspeople, who at the time were charged with supporting these cardinals, got angrier and angrier, and finally said, we've got to lock these guys in. These guys have to make a decision. They locked them in. Then they began rationing food, giving them less to eat. At one point, the story goes, and documents show, that they actually removed the roof of the palazzo to let the elements in, to let the rain, to let the sun in, because they said, you guys have to make a decision. Of course, there were battles between among noble families here in Rome. It was a dangerous time in Rome, and they were in Viterbo because the Pope had died in Viterbo. So at one point, the conclave, what would become the conclave, the process to choose the next pope, was there where the Pope had died. But as we look at a longer conclave, we will not be looking at 1,006 days. That is certain. And our friend John Allen here has done some math. I'm stealing it from him. John, sorry, apologies. But looking back at the last 10 conclaves, John did the math, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but you're saying about 6.8 votes is what it has taken on average, looking back over the last 10 conclaves. So that could mean that we could have a pope by the end of the week, not 1,006 days.
Although if
I can confirm Seth's math is absolutely correct.
Although, can you confirm Seth's anecdote? I love that story. It's one of my favorite ones about the very long conclave, the rationing, the locking them in, and then the removing the roof. That'll certainly focus the mind, won't it?
Well, look, conclaves have been held in various places throughout the history of the Catholic Church. You've had one in France, you've had one in Germany. Depending on the sort of historical situation of the papacy, it hasn't always been here in Rome.
Yeah, although they've had the real estate for it here, and the Sistine Chapel purpose-built for conclaves back in the 1470s. First one was in 1492, as the Monsignor mentioned. And then they have this long gap where all that other history rushes in and intervenes. Now they're back. I don't know why they ever left. It's so beautiful there.
But we do still have vestigial elements of that early that conclave of Viterbo. And aside from the fact that it's taking place behind locked doors, there is also the pasta of the conclave, very famous. It's the pasta that is served to cardinals during the conclave, and it is intentionally simple. It's a pasta made just with butter and Parmesan cheese, and that's it. And the idea is, if you want your classic Roman dishes, if you want some bucatini amatriciana, you got to give us a pope first. Okay. And then we'll let you have at it.
Isn't it funny how, because most of the food we feed our kids is actually that very simple pasta, which is butter and cheese.
There's also the interesting situation here of not only the scrutineers reading and the revisors checking, but they have the infermiere that have to go to the Casa Santa Marta if somebody is ill. So if somebody has had a bad pasta and they can't come the next day, then they will have to vote from their bedroom, and they have specially elected people to go and get those ballots.
And we are nearing the end now, so we may listen to these final cardinals take their oath, and maybe just remind everyone, Monsignor, about the Sistine Chapel, of course also known as the Pope's Chapel.
Yes, the great chapel. The Way of Beauty is another name given to the Sistine Chapel. Just those beautiful windows with the first 30 popes looking down now upon these cardinals so that a new pope emerges. It is a sign that there is an unbroken tradition, flanked by scenes from the life of Jesus at the very center. Jesus who gives Peter the keys. This is what this conclave is all about. Cardinal Ray said that this morning. Who are we going to place these keys? In whose hands are we going to place these keys? And as we end now, these cardinals, the cardinal from St. Mary Major, just coming forward, he's very young, 52 years old.
And where Francis is buried.
Yes. Just behind him is Timothy Radcliffe, the Dominican. We were talking earlier about what cardinals might wear, and you'll see that he is in a white habit. He was a former head of the Dominican order, former master of the Dominican order, made cardinal by Pope Francis. And then bringing up the rear, you'll see the Syro-Malabar Catholic from India in black.
And let's just listen in.
Et ego, Fabius Cardinalis Baggio, spondeo, voveo, acciuro, sic me Deus adiuvet, et ec sancte Dei Evangelia che manu mea tango.
Et ego, Georgium Cardinalis cuvacad, spondeo, voveo, acciuro, sic me Deus adiuvet, et ec sancta Dei Evangelia que manu mea tango.
Extra omnes.
Who's clapping right now?
And there you hear that extra omnes, and the clapping is from people in
the square,
in St. Peter's Square, because they're watching on those large television screens, and translated in Latin.
Here we
they're
go.
saying, John,
everybody out.
And here they go. They are walking out.
Which is not quite true, because in fact 2 will remain in the chapel now. We will have Cardinal Cantalamessa, who is 90 years old. He used to be the papal preacher. He will now give a spiritual reflection to the 133 electors. The final marching orders, we could say, and Archbishop Ravelli, the Master of Ceremonies, will remain with him. And once that finishes, it really will be extra omnes. What an important spiritual job there, that final reflection for the room. I suppose he hasn't shared a copy of his remarks with the press?
Well, Cantalamessa is a historic man who gives often Lenten retreats and preaches to the papal household, preaches at the Vatican. So he is well capable of giving this talk. He is very well respected, a Franciscan who has a lot of experience in giving these kind of reflections at such an important time.
what happens now, John?
Well, so as Monsignor Tony said, the cardinals are now going to hear this reflection from Father Cantalamessa. Footnote, his name means sing the Mass in Italian, member of the Capuchin Order. And then when that happens, then they will begin, the actual nuts and bolts of the conclave begins. Of course, tonight, they will have their first ballot, and this is really the first show of strength. I mean, up to this point, it's all been speculation and hypothesis. This is really the first moment where it gets real.
And let's talk about that, because this first vote matters, right? It gives a sense of where the cardinals are, what they're thinking.
It's really interesting. Pope Francis actually described it as a courtesy vote. Interestingly enough, in some ways, the cardinals do vote for their friends, maybe a cardinal whom they admire, but some strong candidates do begin to emerge. In 2005, when Pope Benedict was elected, the first round, he received 48 votes, and he always remained top of the list. In the 2013 election, Pope Francis received 26 votes. The only one that beat him was 30 votes. After extra omnes,
Monsignor, here we go.
The doors are closed. Extra omnes.
Wow.
Everyone out.
Listen.
And people in the square are applauding because they know this means we are one step closer to having a new pope.
Wow.
Yeah,
I did get the chills.
Yeah, you got the chills as well. After so many days of mourning the loss of Pope Francis, there's now this moment of tremendous excitement that maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but very soon those doors will open and there will be a new pope.
And there's been some discussion about that, Delia, right, in terms of this first vote, just following on what the Monsignor said, that if the Secretary of State, the second in command at the Vatican here, Pietro Parolin, gets some 50 votes, which we won't know, again, it's in secret, then that...
Well, somehow the Monsignor seems to know after the fact. So
right, we may know later on. We may know later on. Could that signal then that he may be able to move this forward?
Oh, absolutely. Tonight is the ballot to sort of see where the lay of the land is. And it's an opportunity for everybody to do it once, because it's quite complex, all of the little steps you have to do. And I think it's also an opportunity for each cardinal to really maybe write down the name of the person they really want, because then, you know, they have to swear in front of God. So maybe they are kind of in their conscience saying, well, okay, I'll vote for Parolin tomorrow, but tonight I'm writing the one I really think should be. So I think there's just a bit of getting into the balloting, and yes, getting an idea of who are the front runners.
But Cardinal Parolin could also be a victim of inflated expectations on this first ballot, because it has been widely reported in the Italian press that he's got something on the order of 50 votes. If he gets 25, that's a good showing on the first ballot, but measured against expectations, it would seem like a disappointment, and people might artificially abandon his candidacy. So we'll have to see.
I do have to bring us back. Those cardinals are going to go before the fresco and are going to say these very significant words: I call as my witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be Supreme Pontiff. So at the end of the day, they are not answering to the press corps, they're answering to God, before whom everything is laid bare.
Incredible. And as they are now locked inside the Sistine Chapel, there are some extraordinary security measures that have been set up to make sure that none of us can find out what's going on.
I tried. They found my bug. They cleared it out of there.
I know. Seth Doan can tell us all about that security sweep and more. Seth?
That's right, Nora. The idea here is that we all learn at the same moment, of course, with that smoke, who has been selected Pope. But doing that in a digital age is indeed very difficult. Today, there is anti-drone technology. There's a sort of digital shield that's been put around the Sistine Chapel. Around the Vatican, there are 80 doors sealed with lead. Of course, you mentioned that the cardinals are not allowed to have their cell phones. If you go and try to place a phone call around there, probably chances are you won't be able to, because there are so many different jamming technologies to try to prevent this world's greatest secret from getting out. As you mentioned, we're expecting one vote tonight, and then the cardinals will be together. They'll have a moment to reflect, have a moment to discuss. That's when so much of this interesting work happens, because the voting itself is there in the conclave. But keeping it all secret is essential, and that's why we saw all those Vatican employees taking that oath of secrecy, cooks and cleaners, people who might just so happen to hear something. Well, it's vital that it's kept secret.
It's amazing. And on the note of secrecy, Seth, that report reminds me, and John, you mentioned the food, the pasta of the conclave. They keep it simple. I've also read, according to our partners at the BBC, that there are also limitations on the type of food in order to protect the security of the proceedings. So certain chickens that might have a cavity where something could be slipped, or ravioli where instead of cheese you have a message. This is the level of detail that we're getting into.
Well, extraordinary measures are taken to protect the secrecy of the conclave. And really, this is not about a fetish for secrecy. It's about protecting the independence of the cardinals to make the choice that they believe before God, as Monsignor has reminded us, of the man they believe should be elected. And it's not like this is an abstract fear that has no basis in reality. I mean, as recently as the early 20th century, secular powers claimed the right to exercise a veto. That is, to be able to swoop in and say, no, you may not elect Cardinal so-and-so. That's why it's in the oath that the cardinals take this time, among other things, that they will reject any attempt by secular powers. So it's about preserving their freedom.
Yeah, and you know, on that point, you remind me to mention to our viewers that the Vatican City is a 108-acre floating independent nation in the middle of modern Rome. It has its own post office, it has its own banking system, its own set of passports, even has its own army. We keep seeing the beautiful shots of the chapel, guarding the chapel, the Swiss guards, a tradition that goes back to the 1500s. Yes. They were considered the most ferocious militiamen of that era. And so the Pope at the time said, bring me them, but make sure they're Roman Catholic baptized. And they were, and the tradition still holds.
Yeah, they have a more defensive role today than they did in the 16th century. But yes, the Vatican is a sovereign state, and another thing cardinals swear to is to protect the sovereignty of the Holy See should they be elected as Pope, and that is to protect its independence. The idea, what makes the papacy so unique, is that it is a voice of conscience on the global stage that has no national interest. It's not subordinate to any other national interest, and he doesn't have his own. There's no national economy in the Vatican to speak of. There's no spy service here. The Vatican is worried about troop movements and telemetries and those kinds of things. The Pope, because of that sovereignty, is free, and we heard Cardinal Ray say it today, that people expect the church to defend those fundamental humanitarian and spiritual values that are so badly needed in this world. The Pope is in a unique position to speak to that precisely because of that sovereignty.
Yeah, that's so key. That's so key. It's been about 100 years now that they've had that sovereignty. And of course, during World War II, Rome was occupied by Hitler, by the Nazis. But Hitler, for whatever reason, decided not to enter Vatican City, and it was able to maintain that independence.
And as you can just see, the sun is at our back right now. It's 5:50 p.m. here, so it is encroaching on dinner time for many of these cardinals as they're going to place their first vote. And of course, we will will be waiting to find out if there is black smoke or white smoke. But let's first check in with Maurice Dubois, who is in St. Peter's Square. Maurice?
Hey there, Nora. I am with Kelsey and Paul and 5 of their 6 kids. 6. Oh my gosh, God bless you guys. How did you get them on the plane?
We cut out TV for about 2 months.
Yeah?
And then they had no rules when they stepped on the plane.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sure the other travelers love that. Right? Your other guy, your little guy is with your dad, right? And sleeping peacefully. So what are your thoughts? You have a 2-week vacation that just coincided with this. That's pretty divine. What are your thoughts on the process, the next pope? What are you feeling right now?
Well, we've been praying a lot for it. It's a pretty incredible process. It's an incredible time to be here. We're Catholic and we're here to see a lot of the churches and do a lot of the things. It's just all ramped up now.
Right. I think I mentioned you're from Lafayette, Indiana. What kind of pope are you hoping for, praying for at this moment? Is it another Francis, like 7 out of 10 American Catholics in our polling seem to want, or is it something else?
You know, Bishop Barron was recently interviewed and he's had a really good answer to this, and he just said, I really want a holy man who proclaims the gospel proudly and boldly. I think that's what the church needs, that's what we need as people, and there's going to be new problems arising and new issues that the Pope has to respond to that we aren't even aware of now, but I think that if his focus is on proclaiming the gospel and loving the Lord, that's all going to take care of itself.
What do you think about the last dozen years in the church?
I don't know. I think they've been good. I think that I've seen the church grow. I've been astounded by the number of new Catholics. I feel like all the new reports are the church is growing in France, and the church is growing in the United States, and the church is growing in England. And I think all of that's exciting, and it's just a good time to be a Catholic.
Yeah, the data shows about 53 million Catholics in the United States, about the same as it was a dozen years ago. So that's steady.
Yeah.
The percentage is a little lower as the population has overall increased. But all that said, what do you imagine it would take to grow the Catholic Church in the United States from Rome? How would that affect growing the Church in the United States?
We're looking at the start of the Christian faith right here, the tomb of St. Peter. It takes Jesus Christ and to learn and become a follower of Jesus Christ, and that's what grows the faith, is to proclaim the Gospels and live as we're taught to live through the life of Jesus and the saints.
Okay, pretty straightforward. All right, Kelsey and Paul. Sorry, I keep forgetting. Thank you guys so much. And good luck with the kids.
Thank you.
I don't know how many Ubers you need to take to get back to the hotel.
A lot of walking.
But a lot of walking. Thanks, you guys, so much. All right, guys, we'll send it back to you.
Yeah, good luck with the kids indeed. Maurice, thank you very much. That family there that he introduced us to, I think is such a reminder about what this is all about and the tremendous moment of opportunity I mentioned earlier for the church. One of my favorite remarks from Pope Francis, the late Pope Francis, is when he compared the church to a field hospital after battle. And it raises the question, well, what are the wounds? And the wounds are the elements of secular life, the ways in which people in their daily life have found a hunger, something missing, something lacking. Whoever this next pope is has an opportunity, Monsignor, I think, to speak to that hungry heart.
Absolutely. And we are in the Jubilee year of hope. And imagine for a pope to be elected, carrying on that mandate of Pope Francis and giving a hopeless world hope. On the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, the cardinals will be looking at that Michelangelo painting of God's finger almost touching the finger of Adam, the divine spark that creates anew. That's what makes this election, these hours, so exciting. So watch this space.
Delia, the church is at a crossroads.
Yeah, it's just an unpredictable moment, really, even compared to the last 2 conclaves, I find. And I think for Catholics in particular, the secular world is important. They look towards the Pope, but you can imagine also for Catholics just how important after 12 years of a Francis pontificate it is to see who the cardinals come up with now.
And John has a moral voice in the world.
Well, that's the thing. We're not just electing the head of the Catholic Church, although we certainly are. But there's a sense in which the Pope also speaks on behalf of followers of other Christian faiths, followers of religions, all people of conscience. I mean, as Tony was saying, there is a sense in which the papacy is an absolutely singular voice on the global stage, and you feel its absence when it's not there. We saw under Pope Francis what happens when a pope knows how to pick up that megaphone and use it to good effect. And the question now is, who is going to come next? Who is going to be handed that megaphone next? And what ends is that man going to put it to? That is the drama of the moment, and it's what makes this such an absolutely fascinating exercise.
Yeah. Because he talked about so much publicly and in our interview with him, too, about not having a hardened heart, how the church is for everyone. Todos, 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 as Pope Francis said.
You're absolutely right, Nora. And he carried on what Pope St. John Paul II said, open wide the doors to Christ, don't close them. Pope Francis built bridges. And as we just saw in that image, a seagull by the chimney, the Holy See gull appears again.
And there are a lot of seagulls at dusk now.
Yeah, they really are.
You've heard them. They're absolutely beautiful. There's nothing like being at Rome for this incredible occasion.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful time of the day, and such a beautiful event is underway. And the hope in people's eyes as you walk through the streets of Rome right now, and the avenues and the little lanes surrounding Vatican City, it is very, very special.
It is indeed. So the conclave has begun. And as soon as we see smoke, black or white, we'll come back on the air to bring you the news. Our coverage of the Papal Conclave continues on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and on tonight's CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. For Tony DeCopel and our entire Rome crew, I'm Nora O'Donnell. Thank you for joining us.